ISIS Audiobooks presents an unabridged recording of The One That Got Away, written by Chris Ryan and read by Alan Gilchrist.
In the beginning, I believed, but found the time for doubting. He made no sound. I heard the devil shouting. I wanted peace. I did not want the glory. I walked in hell, and now I tell my story. I sing sad song. I did not write the music. I find sad words waiting just inside my mind. I played my part, but seldom did I choose it. I held a gun. I did not want to use it. Call it fate or destiny. By either name it troubles me. And now, if you should look into my eyes, by chance you might just see a sad, sad soul that sheds its tears, yet lets the heart go free. And in between the two of them, if you should read my mind, you'll know the soul still sheds its tears for deeds left far behind. But if you see the eagle there, then don't ignore the dove, for now that all the killing's done, there's nothing left but love. J. Miles. Chapter 1. Stand by, go. Our target was a disused mental hospital, a large, red brick Victorian building, once handsome, but now derelict, standing in spacious grounds that had gone to seed. According to the exercise scenario, the 5 Middle Eastern terrorists who had gone to ground inside were holding 9 hostages captive, and after a 3-day siege, matters were moving swiftly to a head. As commander of the sniper team, I was in charge of 8 men, pre-positioned with their rifles at observation points in outhouses, trees, and on the ground. 2 men were watching each face of the hospital and sending back running commentaries over their throat mic radios to the command center, which had been established in a separate building some 200 meters from the front door. Each face of the hospital had been accorded a special code for instant recognition. From the command center, the police negotiator was talking to the chief terrorist, but the man's patience appeared to be running out. He was demanding safe conduct to Heathrow for himself and his colleagues, threatening that if transport were not provided immediately, he would shoot one of the hostages. Meanwhile, the officer commanding the SP, Special Projects or Counter-Terrorist Team, was continuously refining his plan for a deliberate assault on the building. One sniper had just reported, "There's a terrorist moving in a particular window," when a shot cracked out from within the hospital. The negotiator established that a hostage had been executed. The terrorists called for a stretcher party to take the body away. The front door opened briefly, and a limp figure was bundled out. A 4-man team ran in to collect it. Then the chief terrorist threatened to kill another hostage in half an hour if his demands were not met. The moment had come for the police to hand over to the military. The police chief signed a written order passing command to OC B Squadron, the senior SAS officer present, who gave his assault team orders for a deliberate option. The moment he had finished, the assault groups moved to their entry points. Now, it was just a question of waiting for my snipers to get as many terrorists in their sights as possible. Listening to their commentaries on the radio net, the OC suddenly called out the order we'd all been waiting for. "I have control. Stand by, go." For the past 2 days, an eerie silence had prevailed in the grounds of the old hospital. Now, a volley of rounds went down, and the whole place erupted into action. 2 vehicles screamed up to the building and disgorged a swarm of black-clad assaulters. Explosive charges blew in the windows. Within seconds, a Chinook helicopter was paused above the roof, and more black figures were fast roping out of it to abseil down to the windows or enter through the skylights. Stun grenades blasted off, smoke poured out. The radio carried a babble of shots, shouts, explosions, and orders. In a matter of minutes, the building had been cleared, the terrorists theoretically killed, and the hostages rescued. The assault commander reported that he had control, and command was formally handed back to the police. Then the OC went in to start taking statements, and the exercise wound down. The guys were pouring with sweat inside their black kit, but elated that things had gone well. As always, the assault had been realistic in every detail and had been excellent training. "Well done, everybody," said the OC at his preliminary debrief. That was pretty good. Because we'd had 3 tough days in a row and were now facing a 5-hour run back to base, he didn't go into detail. Rather, he set 1100 on Friday morning as the time for the main wash-up in the squadron office. "Thin out, guys," said the Sergeant Major. "On your bikes." So we packed our kit into the vehicles and set out for Hereford. But on the way, events took an unexpected turn. It was the 2nd of August, 1990, and on the news we heard that Saddam Hussein had ordered the Iraqi army to invade Kuwait. "So what?" said one of the guys scornfully. "He's just a wanker." "Don't be too sure of it," said somebody else. "It'll make big trouble, and the odds are we'll find ourselves in there. Maybe some of the guys have gone already." Speculation about Iraq and the possibility of war in the Gulf helped speed our journey home. But I don't think any of us realized just how Saddam's aggression against his neighbors was going to change our existence. For the rest of that year, our lives were dominated by uncertainty. 2 squadrons, A and D, soon went out to the Gulf for build-up training, but until the last minute, we in B Squadron were assured that we would not be going, as it was our turn to take over what are known in the SAS as team tasks, assignments for which small teams of men are needed in various parts of the world. Rumours began flying. As the likelihood of war increased, it was said that G Squadron would go out to the Middle East as BCRs, battle casualty replacements. And since the commanding officer at regimental headquarters was ex-G Squadron, the story gained credence. Different options were frequently discussed, one of them being that we might become sky marshals on civilian flights to the Middle East, travelling ostensibly as normal fare-paying passengers, but in fact carrying weapons to deal with any terrorist who might attempt a hijack. The idea seemed quite plausible. On the SP team we'd done any number of assaults on and inside aircraft, so that we were thoroughly familiar with the possibilities. But then the rumour died a natural death. Throughout November and December, men were being selected for team tasks, and it was my luck to be chosen for an Everest expedition, which a friend of mine, Harry Taylor, was planning. When I joined the regiment 6 years earlier, he and I had found ourselves in the same troop. We partnered off together and had formed a good rapport. He left the SAS in 1986, and by the autumn of 1990, he was preparing for his second attempt on Everest. On his first, he had tried to ascend the unconquered northeast ridge, but had been driven off by bad weather. Now, his aim once again was to climb the northeast ridge, alpine style, with a partner, Russell Bryce. But this time, I would be coming up the north ridge with Sherpas, bringing lightweight parachutes. The plan was that I should meet the other two at the North Col. We would then climb to the summit together, jump off, and paraglide back down to base camp. Everything was geared to breaking records. If I could reach the summit without oxygen, it would be a personal record for me. If the others came up via the northeast ridge, they too would establish a first, as would we all, by parachuting from the top. I was quite well qualified for the role, having done plenty of parachute jumps, and because I had spent 18 months in the Alps on a German Army mountain guide course, during which time I became proficient at climbing in snow and ice. In October, the adjutant gave me permission to join the Everest party. Once my stint on the SP team was finished, he said I could take 3 months off. I went to an exhibition in Harrogate, where Berghaus, the mountain specialists, fitted me up with equipment. Already, I had my mind focused on the Himalayas, and I was planning to start build-up training with hard walking in the Brecon Beacons early in the new year. Preparations for the Gulf were playing havoc with the annual rugby knockout competition between 6 squadron teams. Perhaps it was just as well, because so much needle develops during those matches that things become vicious, and guys are sometimes written off due to injuries for as long as 6 months. One of the players was a good friend of the England skipper, Will Carling, and invited him to bring the national team to train. The players could stay in the officers' or sergeants' mess, he said, and they would be saved the usual hassle of fans clamouring for autographs whenever they showed their noses out of doors. He also suggested that England might take on the regiment in a friendly game. Carling came up with a couple of colleagues for a check round, but one look at a match between squadrons was enough. Not a chance, they said. We'll not play this lot. There'd be guys left crippled all over the field. So that little plan never came to fruition. A week before Christmas, we were dragged into the briefing room at Hereford and told that half of B Squadron was going to deploy in the Middle East after all. G Squadron would take over the SP team. Everyone who had been detailed to go began laughing and joking and saying, "Great." The guys still allocated to team tasks were seriously disappointed and angled to join the Gulf party, but I think that privately most people were concerned that the conflict could develop into a big and nasty war. We reckoned that if Israel came in, Syria and Jordan might side with Saddam Hussein. Things could easily get out of hand, and half the Middle East would go up in flames. There was also the threat that Saddam would use chemical or nuclear weapons. I was excited by the prospect of war, but I hoped that if the deployment did come off, it would be a quick one, so that I could return to the team training for Everest. When I heard the news, I went home and said to Janet, my wife, "Listen, we're heading out." Being a calm, level-headed woman, she took it well. Normally, SAS guys say nothing to their wives and families about what they're doing, but in this case it was obvious where we were going. After Saddam's invasion of Kuwait, there had been so much coverage on television and in the newspapers, our destination could only have been the Gulf. Christmas was not a relaxed time. The regiment was stood to throughout the holiday period, and we were busy getting our green kit ready. In SAS terms, green refers to normal military operations, as opposed to black work, like that on the SP team, for which you wear black gear from head to foot. When you've been out of the system, that is, away from military duties for a while, as I had, your kit's not as it should be, and it takes a couple of weeks of hard graft to get everything sorted out. On the Alpine Guides course in France, Italy and Germany, I had learned German, skiing, climbing, mountain rescue work, weather prediction, and how to clear avalanches with explosives, but no real soldiering. Before that, I'd done 9 months on the SP team as an assaulter, so again, there was no military work involved. After Germany, I returned to the SP team for another 9 months, this time as sniper commander. So altogether, I'd been in black roles for at least 3 years, and had not worried too much about having the right equipment at hand, all sorted into the correct places. Now, I brought my webbing and Bergen home to paint them in desert camouflage colours. We were having an extension built onto our house, and a labourer called John was digging the footings. Seeing me at work outside, he came up and asked what I was doing. "Just painting my webbing." "Those colours are a bit light, aren't they?" "Well," I said carefully, "you'd be surprised. It works quite well." In fact, he was right. I had the colours too light and sandy, as I was to find out to my cost. One of the rules within the regiment is that all married men should have life insurance. Jan and I had a policy already, so we were all right, but as soon as the deployment was announced, pressure to take out policies fell on those who weren't already covered. Naturally, the insurance companies put up the shutters, having heard where we were going, and those who did get policies had to pay high premiums. The result was a minor panic. In normal times, the guys try to get away without paying premiums, but now, with a war in prospect, the future suddenly looked very different. On New Year's Eve, with my departure imminent, Jan and I got a friend to babysit our daughter, Sarah, who was just over 2, and went downtown to a bar. But after one drink, we looked at each other, returned home, and sat at the dining room table discussing painful questions. What would happen if I didn't come back? Should she marry again? Where would Sarah go to school? And so on. We stayed up until 3 or 4 o'clock and became very emotional. I wasn't concerned about myself, or about Jan, who I knew would be able to look after herself. The person I worried about was Sarah. If I went, what sort of life would she have? If the Gulf conflict were to escalate into a major war, the SAS would become a small cog in a huge machine. Until then, during my service at any rate, we'd always been the ones who called the shots, who had responded to particular threats. Even in Northern Ireland we could, to some extent, choose our own ground. Another advantage was that our physical appearance was always much the same as that of the natives. In Iraq, we would be operating among Arabs, immediately recognizable as aliens, without any friendly forces or civilians to back us up. On top of these worries was the threat of chemical warfare. It was impossible to say how dangerous things might become, but the uncertainty alone was enough to put the wind up even seasoned operators. Next evening, Sarah's godfather, John, a friend of mine in A Squadron who'd been my best man, came round to the house and wrote out an unofficial will, a letter saying that if he was killed, I, or Janet, was to make sure that his house was sold, £10,000 would go to Sarah, the rest of the money to his mother, his stereo to his brother, and so on. Packing our kit took some time. All our weapons were bundled together and went separately, rolled up in canvas sleeves. When I asked the SQMS if he'd included pistols, he said, yeah, 20 of them. And that reassured me, since pistols were essential backup weapons, which we would need in case our own weapons failed, or if we were caught in a confined space like a vehicle or an observation post. Most of us would be carrying M16 203s, a combination of 5.56 caliber automatic rifle in the top barrel and a grenade launcher below, or Minimi machine guns. Both are over a metre long and awkward to handle or conceal at close quarters. Personal equipment was our own affair. As I was sorting mine, I asked the SQMS if I could draw some cold weather mountaineering gear. Nah, he replied, you're going to the fucking desert, you dick. Won't be cold there. He laughed at my request as if he was the regimental expert on desert warfare. Little did he know what the winter in Iraq would be like. In spite of his brush-off, I kept thinking that we might end up at high altitudes, in the mountains of northern Iraq, on the Turkish border, where snow might be lying. It was as if I had some premonition, but I did nothing about it, and most of us didn't take any cold weather gear at all. At a briefing early in January, the OC came up with a statement to the effect that if war broke out, we might find ourselves some 300 miles inside Iraq, taking out various installations. We thought that could mean somewhere around Baghdad. Back at home on an atlas, I drew a circle with a radius of 300 miles from Kuwait and the Iraqi border. Jan and I talked about the Euphrates, which runs out of Syria and right through Iraq until it joins the Tigris at Basra. From school, Jan remembered that ancient civilizations had flourished in the fertile land along the two big rivers. They had been among the most important waterways then, and the land between them, known as Mesopotamia, had been called the cradle of civilization. I wondered idly what the Euphrates would look like now. That evening I telephoned my parents. I always did this before going somewhere. I'd just say, I'm off, and normally they'd reply, all right, see you then, take care. But this time things were different. There was a feeling that the war might last a long time, and that it would turn nasty. Mum and Dad did their best not to sound upset, but when my younger brother Keith came on the phone, he started crying, and it cracked everybody else off. I said, hey, stop that. Everything's going to be fine. But the conversation brought home to me the fact that we weren't playing anymore. At last we heard that we were to fly on the night of Saturday, 5th of January. Being one of the senior guys in the party, I went into camp to make sure that everyone was ready. One of the lads said, Bob and Rich are in the club, and they're shit-faced. Jesus, where's their kit? They haven't packed it yet. I got one man to go to Bob's room and one to Rich's, telling them to pack everything they could see and bring it up to the guardroom. Then I and another lad went down to the club and dragged the two boozers out. Both very short men, they were propping up the bar, pissed out of their brains and giggling like schoolgirls. The rest of us walked them slowly to the coach, laughing and joking to keep them quiet. They gibbered away happily to each other as we got them aboard and sat them down at the back. And away we went, To RAF Bryce Norton, everyone else very quiet, just chatting to each other, shooting the shit. The TriStar landed at Cyprus to refuel, then flew on to the Gulf, where it taxied up behind a hangar. Getting off into the warm night, we found the OC, SSM, and SQMS lined up waiting for us at the bottom of the steps, all wearing desert kit, with shamags or Arab shawls wrapped round their necks like scarves. It was our first sight of anyone dressed like that, and it rammed home to us where we were. A Hercules was parked alongside, and we jumped into the back. Normally, RAF crewmen are sticklers for the rules, and every time you board an aircraft, they make you sit down and buckle up. But now, on operations, there were no seats or straps, so we pleased ourselves and sat on the metal deck for the short flight up to our forward mounting base, known as Victor. The head loadmaster, said, "Hold tight, because we're going to do an operational takeoff." The pilot revved his engines until they were screaming, and the whole aircraft began to judder. Then he let go his brakes, and we were hurled forward and heaved into the air. 15 minutes later, he went diving in and landed with a couple of heavy thumps and violent deceleration. At Victor, a hangar became our temporary home. A heap of Bergens, weapons piled in big rolls, a stack of American cots, boxes of radios, medical kit, demolition equipment. Everything looked as though it had arrived just that minute. We gathered round for a quick briefing from the SSM. No walking around in your shreddies when the RSM's about. There's a couple of you need haircuts. Don't go into the int hangar unless you're invited. Let's have the hangar tidy, fellas. Keep your kit up together around your bed space. I want the place swept out periodically. Then the SQMS talked about the stores. "Okay," he said, "the stores are there. There's rations there, but I don't want you going into them. If you need any kit, come to me. The ammo bunker is next to the cookhouse. Cookhouse timings: 6 to 7 breakfast, 12 to 1 lunch, 6 to 7 dinner. Grab yourself a bed, get a space. We'll start training tomorrow morning." The OC also gave us a brief, which amounted to his personal perception of how the build-up to war was going. He said that plans for Special Forces were still fluid. A and D squadrons were already well advanced with their build-up training for deployment far behind Iraqi lines, and were out in the desert doing a squadron range package. That is, putting in squadron attacks which use all weapons, including .50 Browning heavy machine guns, mortars, LAW-90 rocket launchers, Milan anti-tank missile launchers, and most effective of all, M19s, high-speed grenade launchers. In effect, machine guns firing bombs. As for B Squadron, the OC said he hoped to get us a few vehicles which we would have to convert for desert operations. He promised to keep us updated on the way things were looking, and told us to get our heads down before we started training next day. We each found a cot and set it up against the wall of the hangar, with a 6-foot table across the foot of the bed and mosquito nets rigged on poles above, and that was to be our home for the next 10 days. Morning revealed that we were well out in the desert, at one of several different camps dotted about a vast training area. Most of the desert was a flat plain of hard, beige-coloured sand, but every now and then runs of low dunes broke the monotony. On these ridges, which were maybe 30 feet high, a few tufts of dry grass and the odd tree were growing, and the sand was very soft, so that vehicles often got stuck. The wind had sculpted the sand into waves, which gave the landscape an attractive appearance. Approaching Victor, you came over a rise, and there was a high chain-link fence surrounding the large hangars and a runway, with sand dunes lapping the perimeter wire. The base had been built as a parachute school. The hangars were for storage of chutes and other equipment, and there were tall towers for hanging chutes to dry. At night, the perimeter was brightly illuminated. We began build-up training, and there was plenty to organize: radios, satellite communications, TACPs, NBC drills. As a trained medic, I set up some medical instruction, teaching guys how to put drips in, how to pack gunshot wounds to stop bleeding, how to treat heat exhaustion. To demonstrate intravenous techniques, I grabbed a volunteer from the front row, choosing someone lean because he had prominent veins. Tough though the SAS may be, some of them were also pretty squeamish, and it's not unknown for them to faint when it comes to injections. Most of our training took place inside our hangar, but we also went on the ranges to zero our weapons, which included 203s, mini machine guns, also 5.56 caliber, and the more potent general-purpose machine guns, GPMGs, known as Gimpies, which fire 7.62 rounds, have a greater range, and are harder hitting than the minimes. There was one set of ranges only a couple of 100 yards away, and a larger complex 3 hours out into the desert. We'd fired the weapons already on a gallery range in Hereford, but because they'd all been packed up, loaded and unloaded several times, we needed to zero them again. The trouble was, we were short of ammunition. For our contact drills on foot, practicing reaction when you bump into enemy, we had only 30 or 40 rounds per man. In a full practice for a single contact, contact front, contact left or right, contact rear, you can easily fire a couple of 100 rounds. We drilled in groups of 4 or 6, as if we were patrolling along. Cardboard targets would appear ahead, somebody would shout, "Contact front," and we'd split into pairs to fight our way back, each pair covering the others as they moved. The SOP, or Standard Operating Procedure, was never to go forward after a contact, always to move back. For one thing, we never knew the size of the force opposing us, and in a reconnaissance patrol there were too few of us to take on any major enemy unit. For another, we couldn't carry enough ammunition for a prolonged engagement. Working in small groups, our immediate aim was to shoot our way clear of trouble, which gave us a better chance of escaping uninjured. But now, in training, with our severely limited ammunition, all we could do when someone called contact was to go to ground and put in 1 bound each. Then we were out of rounds, and doing it dry is never the same. At that stage, we had no 203 grenades, and we badly needed some to zero our sexton sights, pieces of auxiliary kit that you can bolt onto the side of the weapon to improve accuracy. We hadn't been issued with these sights, but I'd had one for years and had brought it with me, so now I fitted it myself. We seemed to be short of everything, not least proper desert vehicles. What we needed were purpose-built, long-wheelbase 110 Land Rovers, known as Pinkies, ever since they'd been painted pink for the Oman campaign of the 1970s. A and D squadrons both had Pinkies, which they had brought out with them. The vehicles had mounts for heavy machine guns and posts for Milan anti-tank missile launchers. All we could get were short-wheelbase 90 Land Rovers, which had no seat belts or gun mountings and were derisively known as dinkies. We also had one bigger truck, a Unimog, to act as a mothercraft carrying ammunition. Under the guidance of a sergeant from Mobility Troop, we got stuck in and stripped down the Land Rovers, taking off the doors, tailgates, wing mirrors and canvas tops, removing windscreens, fixing Hessian over the lights and mirrors to prevent any reflection at night, and welding baskets for jerry cans onto the sides. Somebody said that when the war was over, we would have to put the vehicles back together again, and we looked at each other thinking, you bet. But we kept all the pieces and piled them in a corner of the hangar. We also had 3 trials motorbikes, but only a handful of us had been trained to ride them. With bikes of our own at home, we had plenty of experience, and we took the Armstrongs out and practiced throwing them round the desert. Even as we worked, we were looking at our dinkies and thinking, bollocks, this is crap. When we practiced navigation and drove about the sand dunes, we wasted a tremendous amount of time getting bogged down and having to dig the Land Rovers out. When we had a day doing vehicle contact drills, everything became farcical. We tried to fire the Gimpies off sandbags piled on the bonnet, which was hopeless. And when the drivers reversed hard into a J-turn, guys started being thrown out. With the whole squadron watching the range work, a big Australian called Stan was flung out at high speed and cartwheeled halfway across the desert with his gimpy attached to him, so that he was burnt by the hot barrel. We laughed at the time, but underneath we were alarmed by the thought that we might be sent across the border in these vehicles, and might have to use them for real. What looked funny now might easily be disastrous later. We also experimented with 6 of us standing in the back of the Unimog and firing from there. It was like the chuck wagon in a cowboy film, with the good guys popping off at the Indians. But we soon found that it was impossible to hit anything, because at any speed the vehicle bounced up and down outrageously. In general, it was pathetic trying to operate with the wrong equipment, and altogether our training was poor. The other 2 squadrons had far better facilities. The reason for this was simple. They were the ones who were supposed to be going into Iraq. At that stage, we were no more than BCRs. Nevertheless, we were still hoping that we'd be deployed. Wild ideas started coming up. There was talk of B Squadron parachuting into Kuwait City, which had been occupied by Iraqi forces. The idea was that we would capture a big block of flats and direct mortar and artillery fire onto Iraqi positions. Also, being snipers, we could fire from the building and take individuals out that way. The originator of this plan, whoever he was, didn't seem to have realized that once the Iraqis saw where we were, they would simply blow the shit out of the place, and we would have no means of escape. The RAF planners actively considered throwing us out of a Hercules at 400 or 600 feet. The usual height is between 800 and 1,000, and insisted that we make a practice jump at that height. One suicide mission had been proposed for B Squadron during the Falklands War, and now here was another. Half the guys were going to be knackered by the jump alone. On the SP team, I had been on one practice jump in which 16 out of 30 men were injured, not killed, but put out of action. This time, we had drawn and fitted the parachutes, and we were about to walk out of the hangar for the training jump when our own OC cancelled the option. Immediately, another rumour came up, even crazier. We were to jump into Baghdad and take out essential installations, such as power stations, but soon it was found that cruise missiles could do the job from a distance of several hundred miles. The desert around the base was exactly as I'd expected it to be, hot and sandy, with plenty of dunes and undulations to give cover. In spite of the limitations imposed by our lack of equipment, it was good for training, and we were working long hours. Up at 6, train all day, have dinner, sit down for a couple of hours, and then once it was fully dark, do a night navigation exercise before going to bed at 10 or 11. Several of the guys had radios, and when the 6 o'clock news came on the BBC World Service, everyone would crowd round to listen. High-level diplomatic negotiations were going on in Geneva and elsewhere, as world leaders struggled to avoid a confrontation, and from one night to the next, the chances of war went up and down. For recreation, there was a school of card players, and some people would read anything from Shakespeare to Viz comics. I'd taken a load of paperbacks by Tom Sharp, who always makes me laugh. On the whole, though, we were too tired to read or play, and we began to suffer from sleep deprivation. Then suddenly, another job came up, for a team to go down and put extra security on the British Embassy in Abu Dhabi, during a visit by Douglas Hurd, the Foreign Secretary. They picked 5 of us who had done the bodyguard's course and ferried us down there. In Abu Dhabi, we had a look round the embassy and settled into a flat-roofed bungalow within the grounds, which were maybe 100 yards square and beautifully kept. A huge garden with irrigated lawns, shrubs, flower beds and trees. The main embassy building was 2 stories high and quite large, and several other staff bungalows were dotted about. Local security was operating outside the walls of the compound, and we were to patrol inside. Up at Victor, we were banned from going into town, but here there was nobody to keep an eye on us. Hurd was not due to arrive until 6 p.m, and we had a couple of hours spare. Also, we were dressed inconspicuously, in casual civilian clothes, polo shirts and corduroys, so we took our chance and went into town for a look around. It was strange, walking round the streets of a prosperous, gleaming new town, to find that everything seemed normal, with not a hint that a major war was about to erupt. It felt good to have a break from training, see a different culture, and eat different food. After a meal, we did some shopping and bought little radios, miniature binoculars, and a camera. I also bought a couple of shamags for myself and another 4 or 5 for the guys still at Victor. Then we slipped back to the embassy in time for the arrival of our star guest. When he came in, we saw him get out of the car and go into the building, so that we knew he was our responsibility for the time being. The situation, in the run-up to war, was enough to make anyone jumpy. We'd been getting reports which suggested that the Iraqis were capable of parachuting a Special Forces team into Abu Dhabi to take Hurd out, and at the time we had to treat them seriously. We thought they might have kamikaze types, trained either to drop from the air or to come in by boat, because the embassy was only about 100 meters from the sea. After dark, the perimeter wall was illuminated by lights that cast deep shadows, so that it would have been difficult to spot anyone hanging about. In the middle of the night, one pair of our guys was on patrol in the compound, and the other 3 of us were asleep in the bungalow, when somebody suddenly began screaming, "Contact! Contact!" at the top of his voice. Still half asleep, we leapt up and cocked our weapons, bumping into each other as we rushed around trying to make out where the enemy was. Just as we were about to burst out and sweep the compound, we realized that the person yelling was Paul, who'd been having a nightmare and had dreamt up the whole confrontation. Somehow we settled down again, and in the morning, after Hurd had made an early departure, we whipped into Abu Dhabi again for breakfast of coffee and croissants. A couple of the guys bought telephone cards so that they could call home. Back at Victor, nobody mentioned anything about having been in the town, and when I handed out the spare shamags, I said to the lads, "Just don't tell anyone where they came from." That little episode left us even more exhausted, and we told the OC we needed a day off because we were knackered. He made a compromise and let us off a navigation exercise so that we were able to get our heads down for an extra 4-hour stretch.
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the other side of this cassette.